Wagwan fam, it's your boy Jack Slack, Fights Gone By podcast. Coming at you ahead of UFC 242, Khabib versus Poirier, or Dustin versus Nurmagomedov. Both of those annoy me. Use either both their second names or both their first names. Someone pointed out they did Joanna versus Namajunas, like Rose doesn't have a weird second name that people wouldn't be able to spell. Oh well, annoys me slightly more than when they adopt nickname as an actual name. Like Mirko Krokop's name is not Mirko Krokop, but if you only followed the UFC, you might think it was, or Mauricio Shogun, or the Korean Zombie. He literally wants to be billed as the Korean Zombie now. Brian Stan was saying that on commentary. He was like, I've tried to call him Chan Sung Jung, but he refuses. Anyway, it was an interesting week. We got some stuff to recap because I didn't do one earlier in the week, because it was sort of like even the UFC weren't pretending it was a full event. It was very much, here's your China event. But one interesting thing did happen on the card. We were saying this before, like, I did a big study of Weili Zhang, new champion Weili Zhang, spoiler. She, I said she had this 95% finishing rate. She came to the UFC, they put her in with two of the most risk-averse fighters in the division, so she had two incredibly boring fights. I mean, she had 3 fights, won one of them by a finish, but then the other two, were just 15 minutes of low kicks on their own, step-up inside low kicks on their own, and the occasional side kick. And so I got mixed reactions. I got some people being like, well, Slacky told us that, that if she did fight someone who'd engage, she'd knock her out, which is totally not what I said. And I got other people saying oh, well, Slacky said that she's a terribly boring fighter and she never engages, which is also not what I said. I was very surprised, but equally, I feel like it's one of those things like when I say, when Josh Thompson knocked out Nate Diaz, I said that the Diaz brothers are going to get themselves knocked out at some point if they keep fighting like they do, but you shouldn't be planning to be the first to do it. And I felt like that was the same with Jessica Andrade, because I think that Rose Namajunas did a much better job tagging her up on the way in. Weili Zhang's caught her in sort of Weili Zhang's thing is if she gets in close, it's left hook, right straight, left hook, or whatever, and that's it. Her only real connections are if people step in off the low kick and stuff. But that's what she did. Whereas Rose Namajunas was lining Jessica Andrade up, lancing her with straights, and then moving offline. What I'm saying is I think that Rose Namajunas did a better job, even though Weili Zhang only had a few moments to do that. But the way that Andrade just dived in after she had her bell rung really just played into it, and Weili Zhang did a good job separating with the double collar tie. We talked about the double collar tie. Ahead of this, we said Angie Hill did a good job using it to keep separation, but that Jessica Andrade will put herself in the double collar tie, much like Nick Diaz does, and Fabio Maldonado. I remember giving him praise last week because I very rarely do that. They put themselves in the double collar tie and then they hit the body. And that's what Andrade tried. She was going wild, tried for a clinch. Zhang clamped on the double collar tie with the forearms in front of the collarbones, and Jessica Andrade was like, okay, well, I'll wail on your body. And you're like, that's not the time you want to do that, Jessica. Clearly, you've just been hit pretty hard. Don't swing wild while in the position where someone can knee you in the head, or then break with elbows, as she did. Lovely elbows. And I said this last week too. I said, she's surprisingly good with her elbows and very accurate with her elbows. And more on the ground, I noticed this. But it stuck out to me because elbows are illegal in Sanshou, or at least most of the Sanshou I've watched, like the World Championships. So that was interesting too. I mean, she's a very good fighter. I'm never going to say she's not a very good fighter. I just had a little bit of trouble finding good footage of her against good opponents. Because even in her last defense of her Kunlun title, she was fighting someone with a 5-8 record. There's not... It's not a very strong field outside the UFC, and even in the UFC, WMMA is still very much getting on its feet. But no, I like Weili Zhang. She's looking good. And it just cements what I've always said about Jessica Andrade. She would be, she was a handful at bantamweight even. She's 20 pounds down from where she was, and that's in the lower weight classes, so that's even more of a percentage of your body weight. And she's still a handful, and she can't fucking strike. She's got no striking ability to speak of. She's got, she can bang, no one's doubting that, but if she had I'm going to blame her coaches for this, because, you know, sometimes I don't believe that anyone is completely uncoachable, but some people are, you know, going to struggle more than others. Some are just never going to be super smooth boxers, but I'm not asking for a super smooth boxer. This and Zaleski in the co-main event, completely coachable skills, let these people down. Jessica Andrade throws a punch or whatever, or throws a low kick, and stands there and gets hammered in the head. And I noticed this against Rose Namajunas especially, because am I not always saying, you know, inside low kick, step in, start swinging. She somehow does it where she throws the inside low kick and then she comes down and gets smacked in the head, snaps her head back. Happened about 5 times in quick succession against Rose Namajunas. And clearly she was like, well, I best not kick, because that's what happens when I kick. You're like, no, that's happening because you're then standing still with your head in place. Head movement, guard, checking the hands. There are so many, well, there's not so many, but there's a lot of ways to make yourself less hittable. And she only needs to adopt one, and she hasn't adopted any. So, you know, she could be so much better than she is. She could be, you know, she was already a force at bantamweight. She was a bit more hit and miss than she was at strawweight. Strawweight, she only has the loss to Joanna and then this one, but she did look bad against Rose. But if she could actually fucking strike, or defend herself a bit better in between, she could be a force at like 3 weights. How ridiculous is that? But, you know, when you just rely on the athleticism all the time, and it doesn't help that her sparring partner is fucking Priscilla Cachoeira. So I think she's always going to be she's going to be one of those what ifs. I don't think, you know, maybe she wins the title back, because it's getting to that point in that division where it's like it's the hottest potato in MMA. I described it as the strawweight title. It's so frustrating watching this lass with such obvious athletic talent, and obviously not afraid to get hit, not a bad chin, because she's been hit like this dozens of times before already, but it was always going to fail at some point, and she just, you know, didn't even know what to do when it did. But, you know, not to take off Weili Zhang, did a fantastic job with what she was given. And yeah, so the other one that I caught was, I caught the one where that lad was swinging wild, and someone said that he was checking his pockets to see if his keys fell out between his punches, because he was literally just windmilling, doing the weed whacker. But the other one I made time to watch was Zaleski versus Jingliang, the Leech. And as much as I hate the Leech for trying to gouge out Jake Matthews' eyes and denying Jake Matthews a very solid win there, by eye gouging his way out of a guillotine, he has looked pretty good in his last few. And what I liked was in his last one, he was all pressure. He's quite commonly about pressure. In this one, he was about moving away and staying away from Zaleski and, you know, hitting in between. You know, he was being the passive party in terms of being elusive, but he was also the one doing all the landing. Zaleski, you know, this is one of those fights where you realize, shit, this guy's got 7 on the trot. He's finished his last 3 or whatever, but there's massive holes in his game. You know, clearly people have just been playing into what he can do, and now you're being shown what he can't do. And you know, like I said, cutting the ring takes no athleticism, and that's a big statement. I mean, if you got like, if someone's actual turning circle is like a barge, then maybe not. But if you are athletic enough to get to this point as a fighter, you are athletic enough to cut the cage. And he had no idea what he was doing. And then there were other things, like his kick selection was... I'm watching the Leech circle the cage, using a nice long stance because he likes to box. His legs are there the entire time. And I'm going, okay, why are you still throwing what someone called meme kicks? He's just throwing spinning shit or high kicks and stuff. And you're going, not only is that a waste of energy and low, high reward, low percentage techniques, you could be low kicking, which takes no athleticism. I remember when I said, like, before the second Diaz-McGregor fight, I was like, the low kick is always there. He needs the low kick. And people were showing me videos of Conor McGregor throwing low kicks against a bag in tie shorts, and they were shit. And they were like, this will never work. I was like, it's a low kick. It doesn't matter if they're shit. They're easy to throw and land. And then Conor McGregor came out and low kicked the shit out of him. It's like Dan Henderson had the ugliest low kicks you've ever seen, but they did their job, and he used them better than many of these guys who have beautiful low kicking technique. But no, Zaleski was like, no, I'm going to do spin shit. And by the time the third round, we were about a minute into the third round, and I was like, Zaleski's blown this. And I said that on Twitter. I was like, Zaleski's blown this fight. And then he managed to get stopped too, so pretty bad. Good on Li Jingliang. He looked good. And of course did it at home, which is always good. China rapidly at work, editing the elbows to the back of the head out of that Jessica Andrade stoppage, though. Do not trust China. China is asshole. So that was that. And then Valentina Shevchenko, because we had to make it about her, she came out and she was like, well, no, I could fight Weili Zhang, but I don't think she should jump the line again. She should have to do something in this division first or defend her title. And my reaction to that was like, yes, if you enter a new division, you've got to fight someone good like Priscilla Cachoeira before you get a title shot. And then, if you've won a title, you need to defend it against someone on 2-fight losing streak coming up from the division below, like Joanna Jędrzejczyk. Valentina just full of shit. Amazing Valentina thread gone up today. Posted a picture of herself in, Arabian dress in not Saudi Arabia, Abu Dhabi. And comments are just, she's in the desert, but the comments are absolutely fucking parched. And one guy, I'm going to read you the translation here. And, it's not like I'm doxing someone here. The guy put it on there with his face. A photo of it. It's like not in his profile picture. He uploaded a photo to put on this thing with the statement. Someone translated it for me because people now bring these to my attention. They send me them. Grow me for everything. I will steal you, my queen. You belong to me, and you are a kind. You are a very kind tigress. I was about to say, isn't that Nunes? No, she's the lioness. You open the burqa. What? Since you opened the burqa, I love this beauty, admire what I am proud of. It's nice to see you nice now. And forever to fall in love and always say at a meeting, Val, love you. And then there's just a picture of his face, like staring into the camera. He's clearly taken the selfie, but he seems surprised by the photo being taken. Absolutely bizarre. What a fucking mess. Just Valentina fandom in general. But then, at least she's a good fighter, whereas Megan Anderson's comments are just the thirstiest you've ever seen, and she's the 5th best fighter in a division that now has 4 women, because big news story this week. That links us to our news story. Cyborg has just gone to Bellator. Scott Coker announced that he's paying, it's going to be the highest paying female MMA contract ever, and you're like, so you just fucking Julia Budd? What's happening there? Fucking her over, that is. Someone else pointed out that Ryan Bader's fighting this weekend, and he breaks the record for most defenses of the Bellator heavyweight title by defending it. But he hasn't gone through the usual Bellator heavyweight tradition of getting into a contract dispute with Bellator. So you got the Julia Budd fight, and then you got fuck all else, because Scott Coker was then like, oh, she's also free to box or kickbox. And you're like, well, that opens up 2 more fights. Anyway, chances are, if you're here, you want to hear about the UFC 242, particularly Khabib versus Dustin Poirier. So let's take a look at what's on this card. Oh shit, I just realised I missed one championship immortal triumph. Oh, that's right, I only missed Nongo and... Oh, it was in Vietnam. It was Vietnam, so it was an entirely kickboxing card because MMA is illegal there. I think Arnaud Lepont was pointing that out on Facebook. And they had Anderson Braddock Silva on it, and he's just woeful. Oh wait, no, this is on Friday. Oh, brilliant, cool. Haven't missed it. Now I can make the choice to, which is how I like it. So on this 242 card, which a lot of people aren't particularly hot on. I'm noticing the cards are getting like kind of sloppier on name power at least. But to be honest, this one's not too bad. You got Zach Cummings, who's all right. I mean, he's Sage Northcutt's best win. The sad part about the whole Sage Northcutt thing is Sage Northcutt left on possibly the best win of his career. And then went and got sparked with his face broken in 8 places by like Cosmo Alexander, who I don't believe I've seen since either. Maybe he's fought, but I didn't see it. So obviously the star power rub didn't work out. Zach Cummings is fighting Omari Akhmadov. Akhmadov's on a 3-fight run, beat Kyle Noak, Abdul Razak Al Hassan. Oh, I remember that one. And then Tim Boetsch most recently. Tim Boetsch, I feel like he's on a bit of a slump, but before that he lost to Zaleski. But now we know that Zaleski can't box for shit, so... lost to Zaleski and Gunnar Nelson. Oh, Sergio Moraes. I was going to say only to big names, but yeah, I mean, Akhmadov's not bad. That'll be a decent one. A bit more interesting here, you got Nordin Taleb versus Muslim Salakhov. Salakhov's a fun lad, actually, because he's he's another one from a Sanda background, except he's not Chinese, which is always odd. He actually won the King of Sanda, or the Sanda Kings Cup, and I believe he's the only non-Chinese to do that. I mean, that's only at one tournament. They have the World Championships and things like that, but it was a pretty prestigious one. Liu Heilong won it. I think he won it a couple of times. He lost to Salikov lost to Liu Heilong when they fought back in like 2003. Had a good run in Sander. Came to MMA back in 2011. Has fought his way up to the UFC. Lost to Alex Garcia in his first fight there, but coming off a knockout of Rick Rainey. Though that was overshadowed by being on the Poirier versus Gaethje card. Well, actually, I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, Poirier versus Gaethje, because, we'll get onto that in a minute. But, Muslim Salikov, good Sanshao guy. Well, very good Sanshao guy. Against Nordin Taleb, who is a guy who is very good at kicking. If you've seen Taleb fight, huge welterweight. Well, he'd be an alright middleweight. He's a huge welterweight. Really good kicking game, body kicks, leg kicks. High kicks, even kicks to back leg, which I love. And you've got to be pretty confident to do that in MMA because you're getting closer to the guy. Ben Henderson used to do it, but like Ben Henderson, his whole thing is wrestling, so you're a bit freer to do it. And if you don't know what the reason we love the kicking of the back leg is that guys don't get as conditioned on their back leg. In fact, I think it was Anderson Braddock, the Bum Silver, who Rico Verhoeven knocked out with low kicks to the rear leg. He hit him with like an inside low kick, right straight left hook, and as he landed the left hook, he hopped forward a bit so that he could kick almost up the center like he would to kick someone in the crotch, but kicked his back thigh and knocked him down that way, like punted his leg all the way out. Uchimata Geri, I believe they call it in Kyokushin karate. Uchimata obviously being inner thigh, which is the throw in judo. But Nordin Taleb, one of the worst broken noses I've ever seen. But his last one, who was that against? He got a decision over Oliver Enkamp back in 2017. That was good. That was one where Enkamp just sort of kept putting himself on the fence and then trying to like wheel kick off it. And you go, no, just do the point fighty stuff, the karate stuff. Just, pop a couple of punches out the side door. But Enkamp, I think it's going to be... I think Cage Warriors have picked him up now. But I think he's going to be, or maybe it's Bellator, but I think he's going to improve a lot over the next few years. He got into the UFC very young and was sort of like, a little bit, I suppose, daunted. Not daunted, probably wouldn't say he was daunted, but he was getting beat by guys stepping in on him and flustering him a little bit much, like he did against Danny Roberts. And speaking of Danny Roberts, Taleb beat him too, sort of shortly after. Had a couple of losses. Claudio Silva, Sean Strickland got back on the winning column against Kyle Prepolak at the Canadian card. I mean, he was the heavy favourite going into that. He was like pretty much expected to win because they put all the Canadians in action against guys that they could beat, but gave him a battering, and it was good fun too. Fun kicking game when he's allowed to do it. And to be honest, Muslim Salikov. Now that's the interesting thing. This could be the fight where Muslim Salikov brings the Sander/Sanshao out in full. Because if you've ever watched any Sanshao, it's all kick catches, all sick ass throws off the kick catches. So it would be great to see him do that. But you could get an awkward cage stalling match out of this one because neither man feels comfortable kicking, or neither man wants to let the other man kick. What else you got? Bilal Muhammad's back versus Takeshi Sato. Bilal Muhammad was hot shit. Isn't he Palestinian? I thought he was Palestinian. He had a Palestinian flag at one point. But he was hot shit until he met Vicente Luque, who starched him with that amazing left hook back in... That was Madison Square Garden, because I was like, the ghost of Joe Frazier is watching that and smiling. But since then, he's actually been pretty bloody solid. He's got 6 fights under his belt since the Luque knockout. Only lost a decision to Jeff Neal. Beat my boy Curtis Millender most recently. Not really a great finisher, but a good all-rounder. Meanwhile, Takeshi Sato just got done knocking out Ben Saunders a couple of months back. Yeah, I like that. That could be a good one. This is actually good, because, some of these cards you look down at, you go, I don't know any of these fucking guys. You really had to scratch your head and go, okay, I must have seen him at some point. When did I see him? But all these guys I remember seeing, which is pretty good. This is an interesting one. Timo Packalén versus Otman Azaita. I don't know anything about Azaita. I don't think he's been in the UFC before. Tapology has him as the number 7th ranked lightweight in the Middle East, for whatever that's worth. Damn! He's got a lot of knockouts on his record. Well, maybe this is the one, get a... Well, he's fighting out of Germany, so I don't know how Middle Eastern he is, but, get the Middle Eastern win almost at home-ish. But, yeah, Timo Packalén is interesting because he fought Mark Jacasey, and I always like to bring this up because, I bring this up all the time, but this is the first time he's been back since that fight. Mark Jacasey hit him with I think it was a side kick to the lead knee, and I think Timo was fighting with his lead foot turned in a bit, but he hit him with his side kick. Timu's knee immediately goes. You see him like stumble a little bit, and then he runs at Jacasey and gets knocked out by a counter. Up to that point, he hadn't been going in because obviously Jacasey's a counter striker. Everyone was obsessed with the overhand left or whatever it was, knocked him out. Nobody really noticed the kick. Came out almost immediately afterwards that he'd severed his MCL or something like that. So Jacasey kneecapped him. That was in March of 2017. He was out, booked to fight in October. Again, re-injured the knee, was out longer. Booked to fight 2019, so that's a year on. And again, he's pulled out due to injury. That was supposed to be back in April. Pulled out again due to injury. Don't know if that's the knee that time, doesn't say. But here we are, September of 2019. He injured his MCL in a fight in 2017, March 2017, early 2017. So anytime someone tells you that, those side kicks to the knee, you can ruin someone's life, invert their knee, blah, 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 it doesn't happen. But be aware that there are examples of it causing people serious injury. People always have to be one side or the other. You can't be like, they're harmless, So that used to be the thing. Like, people go, well, name me one guy who's been seriously hurt by a side kick or an oblique kick to the knee. So just say Timo Packalén, because, that's who it is, Captain Timo. But yeah, so that'll be interesting. I mean, I can't remember really seeing Timo fight aside from that quick Jacasey knockout, but he's always been in my head since that fight, because I was like, when is that dude going to come back? He has been fucked for a long time. I just assumed he was out of the UFC or something, or like Brandon Thatch, when he left the UFC, he was like, fuck it, I don't need to fight anymore. If I'm not going to make it at the highest level, I'm not going to bother fighting, which I think is a respectable thing to do. If you say, okay, cool, I had my shot at the UFC, not going to waste any more time doing this, that's fine. But apparently Timu was being kept on the UFC contract, and he just had to wait ages to get back in action. Sarah Morris versus Liana Joju, who I believe is from Jordan. Nope, misread that flag. She's from Georgia. But interesting. I did not expect much. I don't know if I expected a single women's bout on this. It's Abu Dhabi. Because it's just, it's a strange place, because they had the Abu Dhabi Combat Club at Abu Dhabi a couple of times, and I knew people who competed, and I believe the men got prize money and the women just got trophies and medals. Sucks if you're Michele Nicolini or whatever, and you're the best female grappler maybe ever, and you keep winning ADCC or whatever, and you just never get anything for it. Mind you, most of the ADCCs have been outside of Abu Dhabi, so it's probably not like that if you don't actually compete in Abu Dhabi. Subera Chicago, I do not know who that is, versus Leone Murphy. Okay, here we're into interesting stuff. Joanne Calderwood versus Andrea Lee. Like this. If we overlook the fact that Andrea Lee was married to a Nazi and completely fine with him being a Nazi who murdered a black dude in a car, before that came out. When it came out that he'd beat her, and everyone was like, who could have known? And you're like, well, did literally kill someone and go to jail for it and was a Nazi. But her fighting style, pretty fun, to be fair. And then she wears the hammer and sickle on everything, which is double confusing. But really fun clinch striker. I always have fun watching her strike out the clinch. Man, she's been in the UFC since 2018. She's on a 3-fight winning streak in the UFC. I didn't realise she's not been beaten in ages before that. So fun fighter. And against Joanne Calderwood, who we all want to see do well, but always stumbles at some point. But having said that, this is the time she's going to put it together. Now, actually, recently she's been doing really well. I can't remember who she's changed to train with. She was with TriStar for a little while. She was with Higher Level, my boy James Doolan, for a long time before that. But you got to move around. If you're struggling with stuff, no one really knows how to get it clicking. She did just lose to Katlyn Chookagian. I forgot about that. But against Kalinda Faria and Ariana Lipski, she was looking really good on the ground. So clearly she's made a concerted effort at that. This is the thing, if you know something is your weakness, you're training it. Even if, it doesn't seem, we could watch someone and be like, fucking hell, their striking's terrible, even though they've been training it, focusing on it for the last few months of camp or whatever. Because they know it looks horrible, or they know it is horrible. But, for whatever reason, it just won't get much better. And then sometimes you get leaps and bounds. Her work in the Faria fight. I thought she looked all right on the floor in sections of the Calvillo fight, too. But And actually against Andrade too, she came up on a nice half-guard sweep, but Andrade just dived on the guillotine and has mad strength. The thing about that sweep, the Lucas Leite style sweep, if you come up on it well, the only way that the opponent can do the guillotine is to go around in front of you. And to do that, they have to put their back to the floor. So a lot of people don't do it because you've got such a low chance of finishing the arming guillotine when you should be trying to fight the opponent off or at least scramble out to your feet. But obviously, that's what Jessica Andrade did, and Jessica Andrade could probably pop your head off if she grabbed a hold of your head. But there was a beautiful triangle armbar that Calderwood did against Kalindra Faria. I think the fun part of this is that Calderwood is good with her kicks. She's kind of slow as a striker, which is a weird thing to say because obviously, you can't actually hit people if you're very, very slow. But her pace is always sort of almost more relaxed than it should be. Doesn't really use the jab very effectively compared to how well she uses her kicks. And the dilemma has always been, if you're a really good kicker and kneer, how are you going to do that without standing on one leg? And then if the opponent bumps into you a little bit too hard, they're going to take you down easily. But great elbows, great knees. You just don't get to see them much because she's always got that concern about being taken down. When you saw against Hamdalay, Hamdalay is a 105-pounder who was fighting at 115 for that fight. But it was a good scrap. You got to see a lot of Calderwood striking in it. And if you saw her on the regional scene, she could just do whatever she wanted to Lassie. She did she got famous by being Dr. Neville, just kneeing the shit out of people. And also for a walking Anderson Silva back uppercut elbow, which was so cool. But obviously constant knocks to your confidence if you then get to the UFC and then you're suddenly taken down and losing in every other fight. And the Chookagian fight, again, was another one where she just looked a little bit slow, had her moments, it wasn't an all Chookagian affair. I felt like Chookagian was a little bit more urgent. Her punches were probably better, and she worked a little bit more in combination. Whereas a lot of Calderwood's style, because she came from a Muay Thai sort of background, and she has a very good lead leg, lead leg, inside low kick, switch kick, push kick. But all that stuff is sort of like that John Haggerty out in distance point scoring stuff. It doesn't really build into combinations as well as the more Dutch styles. Anyway, yeah, what I'm saying is that fight might be surprisingly good. And again, women in the Abu Dhabi. So at least more forward-thinking than Saudi Arabia, who were very much against the WWE bringing their women over. Mairbek Taisimov versus Diego Ferreira. Now, Ferreira's on a little bit of a resurgence, because I remember watching him against Dustin Poirier back in, when was that? 2015. And he just got battered in that fight. But since then, he's not lost. I watched him against Dustin Poirier and I was like, this guy's so goofy. I just sort of put him out of my mind. And he snuck back in. And most recently he beat Hasdam Kabalov, which is Kabalov sort of stalled a little bit. But that's a very impressive win for someone where I rated him. And he beat, Olivier Aubin-Mercier almost immediately after that Dustin Poirier fight. He's a good grappler. And I think he's the one that has his own gym and he just sort of trains there and doesn't really have world-class sparring partners. But he's certainly very interesting. And again, that Habilov fight, I was very entertained by that. I was surprised by how much better his striking he got. I was surprised by how effective he was many times stopping the takedown from Habilov, who is a very strong wrestler. And he managed to do it without getting wheel kicked like Jorge Masvidal did. That was such a weird moment. Just Jorge Masvidal getting dropped by a wheel kick by this guy who almost entirely is a wrestler. But the opponent is Mairbek Taisimov. Taisimov is a fan favorite amongst that sort of hardcore MMA Twitter fan base. He's been for quite a while one to watch. Was he the M1 champion? I can't remember how well he did in M1. But he came over to the UFC in 2014. Quite early on, he met Michel Prazeres, who is literally a trash can full of concrete. He's just a block. Met trouble against him, lost a decision. Even more hilarious, that was a replacement for Gleison Tebow, who's just another block. Got back in the winning column, and since then he's been faultless. Knocked out Marcin Bandel, knocked out Damir Hadzovic, and Felipe Silva. And by that time, the Silva one was in the first round, a minute in. And that was the one where Rogan was like, so, this guy needs to start fighting top 10 lightweights. Had a kind of unimpressive performance against Des Green, and then was suspended for performance-enhancing drug use. So that's where we're at. It's kind of weird. It's the sort of situation where we're all willing to forgive him if he impressively knocks out Diego Ferreira. He's a fun fighter, regardless. Good wrestler, good right hand, got a weird sort of, I was going to say rusky striking style, but he trains out of Tiger Muay Thai. They've got some interesting guys coming out of Tiger Muay Thai nowadays, because it used to just be like Roger Huerta, and they were famous for putting up videos of like their fighters beating the shit out of guys trying out to be on the amateur team, and you're like, these guys seem like dickheads. I don't think they're going very far, and then they actually did start doing really well. And there was also, isn't Mike Swick out there, aka? He's got his own gym out there. I know that Golden Glory used to have their own place out there for adjusting to the Japanese time when they flew over for the K1 tournaments. Anyway, we're getting into main card business now. Curtis Blaydes versus Shamil. I can never say his name. Abdurakhimov. I believe that's how John Gooden says it. Blaydes, I feel like, at least for me, the anticipation and excitement has been sort of capped by a little bit of Ryan Bader syndrome. That thing where we all go, he's surprisingly good on the feet. Look how fast he's learning. And then as soon as he gets in with someone who's genuinely dangerous on the feet, he's just like, no, I'm just going to shoot, and I'm going to show you what I'm going to do every time. Ngannou countered him perfectly because it was that jab that was annoying him. The jab annoyed Ngannou in the first fight, but Blaydes never really went to it that much, and Blaydes didn't really improve it that much between fights. Blaydes is a guy who, I think he's out of the Elevation team, isn't he? With my boy Sean and the rest of the guys down there. So I'm going to get shit for saying that he's not a great striker, but I think they know he's not a great striker. He's just struggling to get comfortable doing stuff in combination. There was a really good, who did he score that brilliant knee on? Was that over him? He needs someone, or it might have been, can't remember, needs someone in the face on the feet, and that was gorgeous. But, just very awkward on the feet and doesn't look particularly comfortable throwing in combination. But he came back from that win, from that loss to Francis Ngannou, looking confident against Justin Willis. And I think Francis Ngannou is like the pinnacle of that. It's like when Ryan Bader froze up in front of Rumble. It's just that if you were stood in front of that guy, you'd freeze too. But you kind of hope for better from someone trying to be, or certainly with the potential to be, the best in the world in their division. Because his wrestling, faultless. Just brilliant, taking dudes down constantly. I was going to use Mark Hunt as an example, but then who hasn't taken Mark Hunt down constantly recently? But Alistair Overeem took him down really easy. Alistair Overeem was doing some pretty nice half-guard stuff in that fight, actually. Attacking, or reaping the leg and attacking a heel hook from there. And they train together now, so that's pretty cool. Meanwhile, Shamil most recently stopped Marcin Tybura. I'm so glad I don't have to cover Marcin Tybura like he'll be the next big thing anymore. Because again, another guy with tons of potential, you just can't put it together. His Tapology profile picture is him with Vadim Finkelstein, whatever his name is. Vadim, that evil guy who used to hang around Fedor, raising his hand on one side, and then some guy holding a golden cock in the other. Very strange. But on a 3-fight win streak, Chase Sherman, Andrei Arlovski, Marcin Tybura. Before that, lost to Derek Lewis when Derek Lewis was on his unstoppable train to a UFC title. Heavyweight fight. What more do you need to know? Now we're into what Vince McMahon would call the good shit. It's such good shit. Islam Makhachev versus Davi Ramos, and Paul Felder versus Edson Barbosa, Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Dustin Poirier. A couple of these are linked. We got more of a striky one in the middle, but the two Dagestani lads versus Poirier and Ramos is going to be interesting. Now, Davi Ramos is super weird because he was kind of a fixture on like the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu circuit. He won the Pan Ams in like 2011, I think it was. But like his best achievement before his big achievement was a second place in the worlds at brown belt in 2006. Now that is about level with like Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira's achievements. I think he got first place at brown, but never did anything at black. There's nothing wrong with that. You can be an absolute murderer and not get the podium at the Worlds at any point. But it is very surprising then when Davi Ramos moves on to MMA, has a few fights, I think he lost 4 fights, not lost as in, he his opponent or he pulled out of 4 fights in 2015, so he got no fights in 2015. But in that time, he tried out for ADCC, won the trials, went to ADCC, which is the most prestigious no-gi tournament in the world. It is, it's going to happen. It's happening this month, actually. I was going to say in September. It's happening this month. The grappling world shuts down for it because last ADCC, Gordon Ryan turned up and subbed Cyborg. The leg lock game took over. We were all astonished by the developments in the grappling game. But overwhelmingly, ADCC is won by world jiu-jitsu champions. And the occasional incredibly talented wrestler who's also done a load of sambo or something like that. The odd one out is like Sinai Kakuta, who was a judoka. But yeah, it's won by established guys for the most part. Davi Ramos turns up, cleans house. In the final against Lucas Lepre, like multiple-time world champion, I believe. Never won an ADCC, though. This was his closest. So it looked like he's going to storm through the finals. Lucas Lepre's sat in guard, trying to get grips on Ramos, who's set up. Ramos reaches down for his feet to try and tip him onto his back. Fails. Does it again. Comes up and jumps over the guy's guard and flying armbars him. It might be the most impressive submission no-gi I've ever seen. Not just for being spectacular and rare, but also for the level of competition he pulled it off against, who he was and how he hadn't really competed that much at that level, and just doing it in the final of ADCC. Absolutely incredible. So Davi Ramos, as legit as they come. I was the other day I was on the BJJ subreddit, and they put up this clip of that flying armbar because it was also the event that took place in China, and nobody actually turned up to watch it. So they were just all the best grapplers in the world and no audience. But Edwin Najmi, who is a very, very accomplished grappler, was in the comments saying, yeah, I reckon this is the guy to beat Khabib. And people were like, what, really? He goes, yeah, I'll roll with them both. I reckon he probably can. So people lost their minds. But the reason that I bring all that up is that Makhachev and Nurmagomedov, and this is the Abdulmap Nurmagomedov and AKA connection here, because AKA were always very good on the fence. They had a great system of techniques and takedowns on the fence, and they were also one of the gyms leading the way in not putting the hooks for back mount, just riding the turtle and landing blows. They don't like jumping on someone's back, going for chokes, and then the guy bridges up into you, and they're on top of you. You're on their back, but they're on top of you, so you're not able to hit them anymore. I think Tim Sylvia, Randy Couture. Randy Couture knocks him down in the first round, immediately gets on his back. Tim Sylvia can just lay on him for the rest of the 4 minutes and recover, and then goes back to his corner and is like, what happened? So it's quite easy to stall someone out if you're on top of them, even if they're on your back in MMA, especially with the big gloves to grab onto. But yeah, that was AKA's thing. They were like, we keep hitting, we keep moving, we keep doing things, we keep grinding on the guy, tiring him out. Don't give him any static positions where he can just rest without you hitting him. And then the Nurmagomedovs as in Abdulmap and Khabib and Makhachev, who's not a Nurmagomedov, but, I'm talking about that team. They have brought in this very interesting twist on this cage work, and they're both famous for, as the opponent sits up along the fence, they'll grab or tries to sit up on an arm to make some space as they're sitting on the legs. They'll grab the wrist and pull it in. They'll use that far wrist ride, flatten the opponent down on it. That became a huge thing in jiu-jitsu, especially getting up on that hand to create space when you can't use your legs to shrimp. But they're really good at just waiting for that and then snatching it up and crushing you down on it. But anyway, as I was saying, both of them are especially good when guys go to the fence to get up. So we're in this interesting position, and it's really being highlighted by the success of Nurmagomedov and Usman. Both of them are the champions now in the lightweight and welterweight division, two of the richest, deepest divisions in MMA, where everyone they fight knows how to wall walk and can do so very well. Everyone is wall walking in the gym every day. Wall wrestling is, as I've said before, wrestling is not the most important part of MMA. Wall wrestling is, because when you're wrestling, they teach you how to take someone down, but they don't teach you how to wall wrestle. That is a uniquely MMA aspect. But everyone and their mum knows that getting to the fence and using it to build up is the quickest and easiest way to get up to your feet in MMA. However, we have reached this point now where some of these guys are just so good at sticking to you. You know, Khabib, now I realise why they only used his first name on the poster. But Khabib, if you look at his takedown percentage, it's like 44. You know, his shots out in the open aren't always that successful. What he does do is he'll get you down. You will probably willingly move yourself to the fence. He doesn't even have to push you there like Tito Ortiz used to do back in the day. And as you are getting up, he will keep breaking you down and hitting you the entire time. He'll be sitting on your ankles. He'll be pulling you down on top of your wrist. You know, he's got all these little moves that make it slower and harder to get back up. And while you're getting back up, he's hitting you. And then when you're up, he'll try and take you down again. So we're at this point where the problem isn't getting up, the problem is disengaging. And so many guys can't do that against him. You know, Conor McGregor, gonna attract some butthurt fans now who are going to say, like, Conor McGregor never had a moment of success in that fight. And you're like, no, actually, Conor McGregor stayed on the feet for a surprisingly long time. If you watch the first round, the one that, from a pure fight perspective, he won, which I don't believe. But if you watch the first round, like, he does a very good job fighting off the hands. Habib gets on top of him, gets the ankles, and he can't, you know, Habib isn't really landing any punches because Conor McGregor is just focusing on, like, holding his hands. The second round he gets knocked down and it all goes a bit downhill from there. But even then, the periods along the fence, by holding one of Habib's hands all the time, often with an illegal glove grip, let's be honest, but by holding off one of his hands all the time, he stopped Habib locking his hands, stopped him from getting a lot of his takedowns. Habib, a couple of the takedowns came from this, like, Habib would just drop his hands between the legs, pick him up with the high crotch and try and kick out his back leg, and it was a really uncontrolled takedown where McGregor almost scrambled up again off it. You know, you can stall Habib out, but that's still not getting off the fence. You're still on the fence. And then, you know, while it might not be the most interesting thing in the world, you aren't winning a match with your back to the fence. And I think that's what's very concerning about Poirier versus Nurmagomedov. When Dustin Poirier was taken down by Eddie Alvarez, well, firstly, when Eddie Alvarez got him to the fence, which was surprisingly easy and concerningly easy, Eddie Alvarez shot in, Dustin Poirier immediately grabbed a guillotine, jumped to the ground, and he did that twice in quick succession. But when Eddie popped his head out, he immediately got up on his hands and scooted his butt to the fence. And that is, like, the way you build up, but equally, that's putting you in the position where Khabib's going to do all that stuff, like sitting on your ankles, because Eddie Alvarez did it to him, and Eddie Alvarez isn't very good at, like, striking from that position, clearly, because that was where Mark Henry was like, downward elbow, downward elbow. The ref said, you can't downward elbow, and he's like, what? Khabib is actually very good at working from that position. He uses a frame on the collarbone or even the throat, and he'll get his head below the opponents and uppercut. Did it to Edson Barbosa and Johnson. Very cool. But he does all sorts of other things, like he'll move into a smash pass from there. Makachev got Kajan Johnson down, got him pushed against the fence on his butt. You know, Kajan Johnson was about to start standing up, got the underhook, pulled him away from the fence, tilted him on his side into a smash pass, you know, with his legs smashed together. You know, that's the thing. Like, they'll come off the fence, but they control when they come off the fence. They're like, yeah, no, I've got the underhook now. I'll bring you off the fence and I can start working. What I did find interesting this week, because, you know, I've been theorizing for a while. I was like, well, when Tito Ortiz was pushing people to the fence, you know, before the wall walk was a thing, or certainly Chuck Liddell was coming up, but the wall walk certainly wasn't the established thing it is today. Ken Shamrock's idea in their first fight was to turn himself off the fence. And when Tito was pushing him towards the fence on the floor, as he used to do, Shamrock reached out with the same side arm and leg and just turned himself off. And his head came round towards the center of the cage, and Tito followed him. You'll see some guys, like, grab the underhook and try and pick people up and scoot them to the fence, like Frankie Edgar did against, can't remember who it was, might have been Maynard. But generally, it's quite hard to turn someone back to the fence if they've turned their head towards the center of the ring again. Cage, whatever. So that was interesting. I was thinking about that for a while. Then I watched a couple of Makachev's fights against Lentz and Saryukin. I say it every time, sorry. But Lentz, when he was against the fence, this is doubly strange because he's a wrestler, he chose to put his back to the ground instead. He'd come off the fence and start playing butterflies. And Islam Makhachev, all his passes are low half guard passes. So he's having to smash his way past one hook and then try and move past the knee. And Lentz was pummeling the hook back in. At one point, Lentz was in half guard and he used the other leg to walk up the wall and start threatening to like invert or tilt himself over on top of Makhachev. Makhachev moved to try and stop it, and Lentz came back up on the underhook. And when he had the underhook, he moved his back to the fence again and started getting up. And he actually got up successfully that time because he had the underhook. You know, and that's like the opposite of what Makhachev did to Johnson, where he moved into the fence. When he was sat on the fence, he got the underhook and then said, okay, now I've got the underhook, I'm going to move you off the fence because I'm in control. Lentz was off the fence so that he could invert or try and bridge off the fence and make something happen, came up on the underhook and then said, okay, well, I've got the underhook, now I can start building up on the fence. I think that's a very interesting area. If you get very good grapplers saying, okay, I'm going to put my back off the fence now and then move to the fence if I get an underhook, that would be very interesting to see. I've got an article coming up on Unibet about Poirier versus Khabib, and I'm also doing something for the Patreon boys about Makhachev and his weird quirks. But I think that the main thing is that you could have a black belt level guard, or you could be a black belt in sweeping people and submitting people from your back. But I can't think of anyone who regularly threatens submissions when they're scooted up against the cage. It's the position you start getting up from, but unless the opponent sticks their head in that hole, like Darian Caldwell versus Koji Horiguchi, and I think that was helped by having the ropes behind you, so no fence to put his head against. There's not really a guillotine that you can force. There's not really any. A lot of guard play is being able to move. You need room behind you, room around you to move your hips, scoot back, and make stuff happen. And if you watch the Makhachev-Saryukin fight, a lot of that happens because they're out in the middle of the cage for a lot of it. It's weird, crazy scrambles because there's room and momentum, and the cage takes away momentum. If you see either Makhachev or Khabib doing that, the guy scoots to the fence, they immediately reach around behind, catch the wrist, and then they just start lowering him down, or they'll sit on the ankles, and just, it's all about stopping movement, stopping momentum. Saryukin actually also used butterfly hooks well against Makhachev when they're out in the middle of the ring. He's got the butterfly guard. Makhachev starts trying to slice through with the drive to half guard, and Saryukin reinserted his top hook and just lifted him over as Makhachev's coming round. Makhachev drops down into what he thinks is side control, but he's on top of Saryukin's underhook, and Saryukin just turns to his knees and immediately starts standing up. And that happened because they were out of distance, and there was room to move and stuff was happening. If you're out in the middle of the cage and you're on top, any pressure has to come from you pushing into the opponent and the floor, and it's very hard to push straight into the floor and also past the guard. Whereas if you're looking at Khabib on the fence, like against Edson Barbosa, he's just, the fence is there, stopping the opponent from doing anything. So he can just like pick up the legs, run round him, smash him, and step over him. Step over both knees into mount. He did that against Barbosa. There's nothing the other guy can do. He can't scoot back. He can't do jack shit. He can only try and stand up. And if you hold the bottom foot, he's not getting up, which is what Makhachev was doing to Lentz a few times too. So I'd be very interested. So, like, someone joked about Leonardo Santos versus Khabib earlier today, because obviously Leonardo Santos is still not like a top 5 guy, but Leonardo Santos was world famous for his butterfly guard in jiu-jitsu. I'm really starting to think more like making space, using butterfly hooks to force space as Khabib and Makhachev pass might be a better idea. And coming up on the fence if you have a dominant grip, rather than just going to the fence and letting them grab your wrist or sit on your ankles and just fuck you up from there. I mean, this is all just theorizing, but it seems like something that will be at least worth looking into. And of course, there's differences between Makhachev and Khabib anyway. Khabib is much more into shooting low to start his engagements. Makhachev much more about the trips. A very good inside trip. What is it? Large inside reap? Osotogari? No, Uchigari. Large inside reap along the fence. He does it with one underhook, and he'll control the wrist with a free hand. But it's just underhook, chest placement, and head placement. Really just puts his chest into people along the fence. Doesn't care if he has underhooks or overhooks to start with. And sometimes he gets turned off the fence like that. But very, very strong trips. Beautiful Sasai Surikomiyashi, that little foot block he was hitting on Saryukin over and over again while catching his crossed wrist. And there was also he's done it to several people. Nick Lentz, he did it to twice. He's done it to a couple of others. But if they turn him onto the fence and pick up a single, he will hit the uchimata, the inner thigh throw, from the single leg, from a fairly disadvantageous position, which is the same throw that Khabib hit on Rafael dos Anjos when Anjos shot in for a single leg along the fence or whatever it was. So, I mean, Makhachev more trips generally than Khabib. Makhachev probably more comfortable kicker. But they're interesting in their top game out in the open, their grappling game out in the open. Makhachev's very drive to half guard all the time, that very low style of passing. Whereas if you see Khabib, he's much more willing to just stand up and throw punches straight down at his opponent. He was in Michael Johnson's knee shield, and I think if Makhachev had been there, he'd have been head down, driving forwards. Khabib just stands up and throws punches down and basically gets past because Johnson balls up. But I think that's the sort of area where people can have more success against Khabib. Some of those passes against Johnson were more because he was tired or just overwhelmed. There's a knee cut in there where I think Khabib doesn't have any sort of hand position. He just sort of knee cuts with just his legs and then immediately starts crucifixing the guy. And there, I felt it looked like there was a lot of space there, but Johnson was being overwhelmed and obviously tired down. But yeah, I mean, watch it for yourself. But any of the fights where Khabib has grappled out in the open, it's a much more normal game. Like, there's some weird stuff he does. Neon throat, love that. Standing over people's half guard and throwing punches straight down. Really obviously powerful punches, but leaving a lot of space for guys to move. And I think that's where guys who can pummel the feet back in get to that sort of position. Leg entanglements, another great way to slow people down and building off that butterfly game too. And this is where people go, but he's a Sambo fighter. And you're like, Sambo, while they have had heel hooks forever, while jiu-jitsu guys have been afraid of them, everyone's just sort of working from the same hymn sheet now as far as like leg locks go. The top levels of grappling are just grappling. It doesn't matter if you're Sambo, jiu-jitsu, whatever. Things like ADCC. Sambo guys, more than welcome to compete. But anyway, I think that's your secret, or not your secret. I mean, there's no secret to just beating Khabib. But I think that's probably one of the better ways to deal with their game, because so much of their best work comes along the fence. I did a huge... I did a small update to our already big episode on Dustin Poirier, the Filthy Casuals Guide, so go watch that if you haven't yet, just sort of including the Max Holloway stuff. But that really is more of a focus on his striking, we're not getting much chance to sing his praises as a striker, because his boxing's really come on, and I really like it. But Khabib is bringing the questions in this one. It's like when guys fought Shamil, you'd be like, I really like your kickboxing game, but how are you going to deal with the front kick of Shamil? That's the main thing. It doesn't matter what cool shit you've got if you can't get past that front kick. It doesn't matter what cool shit you've got against Khabib if you can't stop him from taking you down or get up once he's taken you down, or do something to damage him or attack him once he's taken you down. I mean, it'd be amazing if Dustin pulls the upset. I'd love that, but it's a long shot, it looks like, stylistically at least. And especially considering the stuff in the second Eddie Alvarez fight, when he was taken down on the fence. Islam Makhachev versus Damir Ramos. I mean, I mainly spoke about principle stuff there, but I think that is the fight where you could see, like, how much a guard... Because Damir Ramos was a monster with arm locks and stuff, arm bars, in his competitive jiu-jitsu career. But I think that's the sort of fight where you could see, like, just how hard it is to effectively attack someone if you're put on the fence. The fence is not... for being on the ground in front of the fence is like 10 times worse, maybe 100 times worse than being out in the open on the ground on the bottom for playing jiu-jitsu, not necessarily for forcing your way up the feet, but then again, you're just in a wrestling match with your back to the fence once you get up. And then Paul Felder versus Edson Barbosa. Like this fight, haven't really had time to rewatch the first one. I seem to remember Paul Felder taking a back kick to the junk. That might not have been that fight, but I seem to remember that. Now, this one's an odd one for me because I feel like Edson Barbosa has such established weaknesses, But there are also just some fighters are not going to be able to do that. They just can't switch to the ultra-aggressive mode. Dan Hooker, came out and was like, I'm going to exchange low kicks at range with Edson Barbosa. And then when he got hurt, in the moments where he was moving forward and charging Barbosa, even as like a zombie, he was still stopping Barbosa from doing a lot of what Barbosa does. But, Paul Felder, what I've noticed about him is especially his footwork sort of lets him down. He's just sort of ambling. The ambling Alp, that's what they used to call Primo Carnera. But, yeah, he just sort of follows guys. And that was especially noticeable against James Vick. Because James Vick is another guy who, if you get in his face and pressure him, there's always been trouble for him. From Beneil Dariush to Justin Gaethje, someone else I can't remember. But, you want to get inside his range. It's provided you don't eat a knee or an uppercut, you can really make it difficult for him because he's got those long noodly arms, his head's up in the air. You can just step in on him and start swinging overhands. And Paul Felder really made a meal of that fight. He very much struggled to put the pressure on him. So I don't know. I don't know if I like Paul Felder's chances in this because he does just sort of follow, and that sort of just plays into Edson Barbosa's game. Because if you're just moving towards him at a set speed all the time, he can time those switch kicks to the liver. He can time the wheel kick. That's what he wants. He doesn't want to be going forward the whole time. He just wants a predictable opponent who's just following him that he can time. What he doesn't like are people who keep going, no, you're not kicking yet, and keep pushing him backwards. Think of being physically pushed like with one hand while you're trying to kick. It's really annoying. And that's what you should be trying to do to Edson Barbosa, but with punches on the chin in between. But it'll be interesting because honestly, Paul Felder is so good at hitting people in the clinch and on the ground that I might want to see him just push Edson Barbosa to the fence and start using that head pin and landing knees to the body and that sick elbow that he hit Oliveira with from the head pin. Anyway, we've rambled on about that for ages now. Looking forward to this event. Actually, having looked at the whole card now and just gone through it, lots of fun fights on there. A lot of my questions this week were about this card and specifically like wrestler. How do you stop people just flattening you out on a wrist or sitting on your ankles when you're trying to get up? Someone asked for the best MMA instructional book, and I was thinking, well, there actually isn't one, because this sport's moved along so quickly. If there was actually a manual, I don't think there were any instructional DVDs even on wall wrestling. So that shows how important it is, because ATT work on it non-stop. It basically completely changed Koji Horiguchi. He fights in a ring now, with no solid surface, and he's still using the wall walk to get up off the floor from underneath people. Joanna Jędrzejczyk, her entire success in MMA, she could have just been another kickboxer trying MMA out, but by going to ATT and working constantly on getting up along the fence, she managed to become, the Chuck Liddell of the ladies divisions. And then I got a question from someone who works for an instructional DVD company, and they were like, we're doing some striking stuff, who would you want to see? So if you have ideas for that, comment them, or send them to me, because I will then send them on to this person. I've been trying to assemble a list, but then Lucian Carbon just put out a DVD, and it's awesome, which is kind of why I'm hot on Andy Risty again. I said I'd do some Andy Risty stuff in a couple of weeks, or next week, or whatever. Anyway, rambling now. If you want to get on board with the Patreon and get the Patreon studies, read the Weili Zhang, because now she's a big deal. If she'd lost, no one would give a shit. But now everyone's like, Jack, have you ever done anything on Weili Zhang? And I'm like, well, let me just direct you to the Patreon boy page. But yeah, Weili Zhang studies up. We do lots of fun stuff there. And it allows me to do this podcast. If you want to send an email to the podcast, fightsgonebypodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing at any time, be it Unibet or Fight Primer or for a magazine or any of the things that I've got going on, fightprimer.com. I'm your boy Jack Slack. Salon quality hair bless.